Jumbo or Happy African History. This program is being brought to you by the African National Women's Organization, ANWO, a mass organization under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. The Breakdown is a monthly news, analysis, and opinion program, as well as a platform for highlighting guests whose issues spotlight the internal plights of colonized women fighting colonialism. My name is Coco Lewis. I am the lead coordinator of ANWO's Harriet's Daughters Book Club and Study Group and the MC for The Breakdown. As always, I'm joined by Jay Amiche, our show producer and organizer based in Portland, Oregon, and president of ANWO, Yejide Oramila, who is also a leading member of the African People's Socialist Party. For today's breakdown, we'll explore the complex dynamics of neocolonialism in Africa, focusing on prominent figures, Kenya's William Ruto and Rwanda's Paul Kagame. These leaders exemplify how global powers continue to manipulate African politics through proxies. We'll discuss the ways they serve external interests at the expense of true autonomy for their nations. We'll also analyze the recent defunding of USAID, a cornerstone of U.S. soft power, its implications for Africa, is the step toward reducing foreign interference, or will it create a vacuum filled by other global players with their own agendas? Before diving into today's program, let me remind you that ANWO is an anti-imperialist, anti-colonial, revolutionary African internationalist organization for African women who organize around the pressing local, national, and international issues that add to the special oppression of African women and femmes. Our vision is to create a world where African women have agency, are valued and protected, and are the makers and shapers of a new society. If you enjoy our content, consider becoming a member if you are African women, or donating if you're not. Our goal for this broadcast is to raise $250. You can donate at any point during the program by going to anwoohuru.org/donate, or you may purchase our merchandise at anwoohuru.org/storefront or at decolonize.com. Additionally, make sure to like, subscribe, and follow us on our platforms. We're streaming live on Burning Spear TV and the ANWO and the African National Women's Organization YouTube channels, and also on the ANWO page on Facebook. Make sure to like, share this program with your network, comment liked, or share it in the chat. I'm excited about today's discussion. Uhuru comrades, welcome to the program.
Uhuru. Oh, yesterday your sound is
not
coming. It's the worst, right?
Yes. Look, we've already concluded that, when we are live, the powers that be messes up our audio.
It's true.
Something truly horrible.
Couldn't hear any of that.
It's
kind of jarbled a little bit.
Do I sound
all right? There you
go. Okay, great. I do some. Well, it might mess up from time to time, but this is what I'm dealing with. This is the technology that I'm dealing with. But I just want to say Happy African Liberation Month to every African Liberation Month. Sorry, African. What was it? African History Month. To everyone.
We can make African Liberation Month.
Every year, every day is African Liberation Day. We're going to be talking about that in today's program. Because, African politics is often made to be confusing, and it often is confusing because there's so many players at play. There's so many different geopolitical issues that's on the ground. You're dealing with, all these powers integrating their requirements on the African continent, African people attempting to eke out self-determination in that space. And then you have these upticks of violence that have an immense number of casualties that also that are just like really astronomical. So we're going to get into it today, and you know that's the reason why African liberation got to be on our mind all the time, and more than on our mind, it has to be like practice. Like y'all, this got to end. This has to end. And, in order for me to be free, I live in the United States. In order for me to be free, Africa has to be free. I look forward to that day that I contribute to the freedom of the African continent and work with other Africans around the world to make that happen as well. So, yeah, Comrade Jay picked out the title of today's program, which is what? Strings of Power, Neocolonial Puppets, and the Shifting Landscape of the African Politics. Let's get into it. We said we wanted to highlight Paul Kagame of Rwanda and William Ruto of Kenya. What have they been doing? Like, why we need to highlight them? What are their egregious crimes against African people that they have been doing that we need to point out? Go ahead, Jay. Pop in.
Where do I even start? Well, I mean, you really can't talk about Kagame without talking about the M23 rebels who are wreaking havoc in Congo right now. And Kagame has gotten, US and UK like financial support, amongst other things. And they're using that money to just basically rape and pillage, literally, actually, not basically, literally rape and pillage the Congo. And because, he's a neocolonial puppet, they're not going to do anything about it. I mean, mainly because that instability in the Congo benefits the people that want access to those resources. And when people are desperate, they're willing to sell their precious items at a pittance. And that's the whole point of destabilizing these regions that have like massive resources. And this is happening all over Africa, but this is especially happening in Congo, and Kagame is a big part of that. And then, of course, Ruto, I mean, so many things. I mean, there's the sending of the troops to Haiti. Like, that was a whole mess and is still happening. And sort of defending and reinforcing the neocolonial agenda in Haiti. And I saw a really interesting video. So apparently, I learned this through Twitter, but there's a song that Kenyans sing often to white tourists. Like, it's kind of like a shuck and jive type song. I wish I could remember that. I think it's actually called like Jumbo or something like that, which I know Jumbo just means like, hello. But there's a song that like is very common for, folks to do, like Black folks, especially in Kenya, to do for white colonial figures, to make them kind of feel happy. There was a movie I remember seeing, I don't remember which one it was, but the guy, he was an African drummer, and he's like, my job is just to sit here and smile. I'm the African drummer dude, and like this kind of smiling Black person performing for whatever. So this song, it represents this. And this general who's like wearing these fatigues is sitting here. He's in a classroom full of Haitian children, and he's teaching them the song. And all of the white people in the comments are like, oh, so I love it, so cute, whatever. And all of the Kenyans in the comments are like, I know you're not teaching that song to the Haitians. Like, why are you spreading this like shuck and jive song and teaching it to the Haitian youth to present to the white people there? Like, what sense does that make? But this is exactly what they do. And besides Ruto, the work in Haiti that they're doing, just 2 days ago, they imprisoned the president of the Communist Party in Kenya. And they're fighting for his release like right now, which I encourage everybody to look into that. I have his name, and I just want to be able to say his name so folks can look into that a bit further. But yeah, so Comrade I can't pronounce his name. Mwivu wa Kaluka. So he's basically the chairperson of the Communist Party, Marxists in Kenya, and right now they've imprisoned him for free speech issues. And we've experienced similar things here in the U.S., but at the behest of the U.S. government. So, Coco, any thoughts?
I mean, there's a lot of thoughts going on.
I know,
I
there's
mean,
so
I
many.
think it's like just to take a kind of a step back because you touched on so many points. Like, not only is the Kenyan president William Ruto, you know, he's pretty much a main figure in neocolonial, like a main face in neocolonialism. So, for those who don't know, neocolonialism, when we speak about it, is white power and blackface. Because you know, we in African center areas around the diaspora, we no longer, you know, acknowledge or voluntarily, you know, give ourselves over to the colonizer or to white man. We want, you know, we want to see ourselves, you know, African pride is something that is a global concept at this time. I mean, we're African internationalists, so we believe in that, in African power everywhere, but it has to be the right African power. So when you have people like William Ruto, who is not only going against what the Kenyan people want, because you're seeing protests and uprising in Kenya, but also, you know, with Kenya sending over troops to Haiti and to go ahead and meddle into what's going on over there in for the United States, for Germany, for Canada. Like, he is pretty much putting his people against, in the name of, you know, white power. I mean, like, this is literally white nationalism in and he is the petty bourgeoisie president doing the, you know, doing the will of the colonizers. So you see him doing things about, like, one of the notes we have here is from October, where Nairobi is negotiating agreements with countries with aging populations such as Germany and Canada to send workers there. Like, so you want to take, you again, one thing we know from the transatlantic slavery is that is African people who was our number one resource. So you taking the youth out of Kenya, out of Africa, and bringing them to these European countries that mean us no good, but to us to be workers there. You really, and to me, in the grand scheme of society right now, is really using everyday people to become workers. We see it all over in the United States right now with, you know, our current political climate. But we have to look at the political climate of our home, with our home continent, which is the continent of Africa. Overall.
You know, you mentioned Kenya working with some nations around like their aging worker population. They sent 1,500 workers to Israel,
Mm-hmm.
knowing how Israel treats Black people. Like, they sent 1,500 workers there. I couldn't think of any worse idea than that. But, you know, I guess if
To
you're
go over there and do the bidding of what Israel's doing to Palestinian people. So again, they're using African people to be the oppressors, the face of the oppressors. Like, I think we discussed it in one of our other breakdowns. They always use African people to deliver the biggest blows to African people or people of color. So, you know, you see, you know, them, you know, those troops going over to Israel and Palestine. I mean, this is
well, the troops,
really
so with
Palestine.
Kenya, they're not sending troops; they're sending farm workers.
Workers, I'm sorry, workers, yeah,
Farm
to farm
workers.
the land, that because they done driven out all the Palestinians. Now they
Yeah.
want you know, to bring the Kenyans up there to farm the land, which is ridiculous. It's just another point of slavery. It's just slavery in a different scope.
Exactly. Yep. That's exactly right. Yeah, but thinking about, you know, just thinking about Kagame again, not to go back and forth between
Yeah.
Rwanda and Kenya. But Yeah, I mean, I think it's just interesting. You know, I mentioned Israel and
Mhm.
Israel's connection to Kenya, and thinking also about how Israel is connected to what's going on in the Congo. And I
Correct.
wouldn't be surprised if Israel's also providing support and resources to Rwanda. I haven't, you know, I'll be honest, I haven't like researched to see if there is, you know, evidence for this out there yet. But we do know that that's what's his name, Paul Gerter, who owns most of the world's diamonds, or the largest diamond mine in Congo, is an Israeli, and so he
Correct.
directly benefits from the destabilization of the Congo. And so you're always hearing, you know, 10 years, 20 years later, that the CIA and Mossad and all of the ways that they had their hands in things. You know, in the current moment, they're pretty clandestine. So, you know, it's hard to know what exactly they got their hands in. But I would not doubt for a moment that they're also working with Rwanda, and Rwanda's working with them. And welcome back,
I
Leslie.
I 1000% agree. I 1000% agree.
Can
I
y'all hear me?
definitely
Can people hear me? Is this
Yes,
better?
can hear you.
woo,
No
good.
chiming
Okay.
in too. It's always something, you know, as I think a comment came through like wiggling the wires.
Yeah.
Listen, it might be an HP conspiracy. I had to change from an HP to a Dell real quick, so
Okay.
it must be the HP laptop. But go ahead, comrades. You were in the middle of something.
No, we were just talking about, I mean, we was talking about both. We was kind of like ping ponging really, because they both are related. Kagame and Ruto are both related, and they're both of these, uh, you know, these West African um, governmental leaders that are pretty much selling out their people and selling out their land to the oppressors.
Yeah, he's been on the radar for some time now, right? Like, he is the US's man in that region, right? Like, he is the US's man. That's why, he can go and I saw something where he says, I don't have Rwandan troops in Congo, but he said, I don't know if I even have any troops there, because he's funding the M20, you know, because he's funding the M23, which is a Tutsi organization in the Congo who's committing these atrocities. And the Congolese people are just like, people need to believe the Congolese people when they say they need to get Kagame out of there. And that he has not been a friend of Congo, has not exhibited hasn't helped forward the mission of the Congolese people or Congo people at all. It's always about Rwanda and its control over the resources that are in the Congo, and the U.S. backing it, and other imperialists backing Rwandan government. It's kind of, it's right here in our faces, and we really need to be aware that this is happening. And I think I've seen some stuff where people with some Black nationalists have even highlighted what great person Kagame is it's not attached to the Congolese thing, but basically some things that Kagame has said about colonialism, right? Like, they think that because he said these certain things about colonialism, that somehow he's like a champion of African people, when of course he's being paid and funded by U.S. imperialism and other imperialism as well. So I think that's really important. And I didn't get a chance to talk about Ruto, but the Uncle Ruckus of Africa is ruckusing, is ruckusing. I saw something, and I think that's in our document, about like him encouraging immigration for Kenyans to go abroad and making deals with other countries for Kenyans to go abroad and be able to do so without being harassed by that particular government. I think I saw somewhere where he was trying to negotiate with Germany and other places. We already know that he pushed for Kenyan people to go to Palestine and work the fields since the Palestinians were resisting. And of course, he stood up and said that he wanted, he's going to help with the Haitian conflict and send troops to Haiti. I think that it's really important that people understand that these are two countries in Africa that are typically doing well for the most part, right? Like they're like, if you look at their GDP and their economics and their rank on the, what is it, the democracy index that they have for Africa, then Kenya and Rwanda are two countries that are supposedly doing well. And I think we have to really associate that with how closely they're connected to U.S. imperialism. Right?
Well, I mean, let's talk about this economy, and specifically in Rwanda, because I don't know, this might have changed, but in the 2000s, like maybe 10 or more years ago, over 50% of Rwanda's budget came from foreign aid, came from the IMF and the World Bank. And they don't do anything, for free. It's all tit for tat, it's all quid pro quo. Like, they extract the resources, in exchange they get the US dollar, basically, access to it in ways that, the other countries can't. And, so the US dollar is weaponized in that way. And so, contrast that to in Burkina Faso, where, they're nationalizing all the resources, and he did not accept a single dime of World Bank and IMF money for the past couple of years. And they went from being, I don't remember how much it was exactly in debt, but a huge amount in debt, to making a surplus now. I mean, they're building an EV, a completely native EV factory right now. They've built, 20 to 50
refinery,
like, basic need food factories to feed their own people. All of their resources they're keeping inside. And so seeing that is really beautiful for me, and just really gives me a lot of hope. Because I mean, the norm in the past, at least, has been, things like World Bank and IMF and USAID and NED, National Endowment for Democracy, all of these things for pouring money into neocolonial puppets. But now we have leaders who are willing to stand upright and actually, reject that in the Sahel, thankfully, and hopefully that spreads,
correct.
Because right now, West Africa and even East Africa too. I mean, Kenya's in East Africa, and West Africa and East Africa, a lot of neocolonial puppets. I mean, in Ghana, the chocolate prices, for example, are set by Europe.
Yep.
And so, I met with a women's producer co-op, and just to talk to them about their struggle. And they told me that they're constantly having to fight the government to raise the prices, because the government argues and literally negotiates on behalf of the Europeans against the own people. It's like, well, the Europeans want this, so this is what we're gonna have to do. And the people are like, aren't you supposed to be representing us and not the Europeans? And that's just Ghana. And so this is happening in Nigeria. The news came out. I mentioned this on the air, and maybe other folks have heard about this, but they just found out that USAID has been funding Boko Haram. And so I don't know if you all remember the story about Boko Haram kidnapping hundreds of girls. Many of those
bring back our girls.
Yeah, I remember bring back our girls. And remember how there was
a slogan.
Remember how they could not find any of those girls for over a year, except for the one American girl they found in less than 24 hours. Do you remember that? The one American girl, the one girl with American citizenship, they found in less than 24 hours. Right. All the other girls, it took over a year for them to find these girls.
And not all of them, just some of them.
Some of them, exactly. Some of them. Some are still not to be found to this day. And so now we've come to find out that $697 million. That is just what's documented. $697 million. So that plus cash, because they give people cash. They give them cold hard cash. They're not documenting the majority of what they're giving people. So we have documented $697 million annually for Boko Haram. And then plus on top of that, however much millions in cash they also received. And that's annually giving that money.
And it doesn't go to the people at all.
No.
It only goes
to Boko Haram.
It goes to these neocolonial. I mean, so I hate this book, but I love this book at the same time. Is Beast of No Nation, and you've seen how that colonial. You've seen how that colonial is a historical fiction. Maybe we had I don't know about reading it for Black Harriet's Daughters, but in that book. The military, would you say?
Flood.
It's Harriet's Daughters Book Club. You know, we break down historical fiction and other articles into you know, discussing it from an African international perspective, which I believe takes ordinary works and, you know, takes it into a different realm. But, you know, when I was reading that book, you had, you know, because the soldiers didn't get the benefit. It's only the top tier of the military, the generals, the, you know, colonels, the captains, and then the leaders, the, you know, executive or the, you know, top leaders would get that. They would live a nice life while these soldiers and these, you know, child soldiers in that case were living in filth and living in squalor and were starving.
Mhm.
And while the leaders were, you know, at home, not in conflict, eating steak and shrimp and lobster. Like, that is the point. To me, that's one of the major points of it, is that, yes, all of this money is going to these countries, but majority of it doesn't go to the people. It goes to these figureheads who are just, you know, being the puppet masters of, you know, white nationalism.
Now that's
And, you
that's
know,
where
also, oh, go ahead. Oh, I was just gonna say,
yeah.
you know, but sometimes it does go to the people, but it goes to the wrong people. Like,
Yeah.
in the sense that they are actively funding like terrorist training camps,
Correct.
and they're using the desperation of folks. They make the country as desperate as possible using military intervention, using the IMF, the World Bank, whatever financial means they can, and they get a traumatized population that is in an unstable place, and they push them over into the edge, and then they put money and funding and training into these literal terrorist training camps, and they actually literally create terrorism in these places in order to destabilize them. And so, you know, I mentioned Boko Haram and Nigeria. We all know ISIL, you know, for some reason they've never attacked Israel, but they're these supposed like Islamic revolutionaries that have never attacked Israel, have nothing bad to say about Israel for some reason.
Right, exactly.
You know,
Right.
which is obviously BS. I mean, I believe that ISIL is Mossad, or ISIS, as they say, but it's technically ISIL, but it's Mossad. They're Mossad Asians, you know. And then also we have like in Syria with the ISIL, but also they used to be Al Qaeda. They went from Al Qaeda to ISIL, but yeah, so funding Al Qaeda as well. Not to mention in
They
Afghanistan, you know,
created Al Qaeda. They
billions of dollars.
created Al Qaeda.
Say that
U.S.
again?
government, the U.S. government created Al Qaeda.
Yep.
And funded and provided weapons. Like, oh, what is that movie? It's got Tom Hanks in it. Is about the Cold War, and then them funneling military weapons over to Al Qaeda. I mean, because it's really they created these organizations for control. I mean, we can say the same thing for Hamas. They was created by the government or colonizing governments to go ahead and control the people, and then it's like they no longer serve their purpose, you know, the intended purpose. They cut the strings a little bit and go rogue, but it's still destabilizing humanity in those areas.
Yeah, Chairman talked about like the Al Qaeda question too. Like Al Qaeda was created so that they could help U.S. imperialism, like fight Russia in, I forget the country, like I think it was Iraq or Iran, and because like to fight Russia in this territory. And so at some point Al Qaeda was like, you know, going rogue and doing its own thing. It left it to its own devices, and it became this thing. But I also want to say, like, you know, that's military. The U.S. government and other governments, I just don't want to, you know, we live here, so we got a lot of critiques about U.S. imperialism, and I'm sure that these are all valid. But there's also these other players in the world who are vying for control and using Africa as a plateau to like also try to control, because Africa is the determining factor around world domination. Believe it or not, like if we see what's happening on the continent of Africa, all the upheavals, all the methods of control, all of the money that's being dumped there, this is the center point for the world to get resources, to get people, to get money, to get leverage. It's a strategic location. And if you look at, obviously, if you see Africa is one of the biggest continents in the world. It touches so many different places in the world. So it's a strategy of not only the US, but other imperialists. But also, like, US imperialism creates non-governmental organizations on the ground in Africa and funnel the money that they are putting into those organizations. So if you have an organization, for example, in Sudan that's fighting to make sure that women are safe, the United States government created that organization, staffed it with local people, gave them CEO or director positions, paying their salaries, and they are now to ensure that they're communicating the same values that the U.S. government is to forward this sort of anti position against whatever they want. So, for example, in Sudan, it's really difficult because the local non-governmental organizations are saying, like, both sides are horrible because the United States have not gotten control over either side. And whoever wins, though, in Sudan will be the victor in terms of who then now negotiates with U.S. imperialism, who gets all this money and funding singularly on the continent of Africa, in Sudan. So I think that's really important for people to understand too. Like the levels of intervention isn't just when people are like, oh, we need the U.S. Some people say this. Oh, we need the U.S. to step in because there's so much war on the continent, and why are they not intervening? They're already there. They're the reason why this thing is happening. This conflict is happening, as well as Britain, as well as France. All these players that we typically know as colonizers on the continent of Africa are there. And Russia is there. China is there. Like, it's all being played out there. So I think it's really important for us to, like, really pay attention. We will not be as confused if we understood imperialism, right? We would not be confused if we understood colonialism, and if we also just apply dialectics to what's happening on the continent, etc. So I think it's really important. And I'll just add this too, from what Jay was talking about earlier in terms of Ghana and Europe controlling, chocolate prices, cocoa prices in the continent, in Ghana. Ghana was, they told the U.S. military to come to Ghana and build a base, right? U.S. is going to pay it millions of dollars in order to rent this land and to maintain a military base, and they're like, welcome. But please don't get it twisted. Like, the U.S. military is already in Ghana, training Ghanaian troops, training Nigerian troops, training Rwandan troops. They're already there, and the economies which we're going to go into, I think, much deeper in terms of, like, USAID. The economies are completely overrun by non-self-determining puppet leaders. Like, it's overrun by foreign and global interests as opposed to the interests of the people.
You hit a point when you said non-self-determining, and that is a key. That's, to me, that's a key thing, is that they are not looking to be independent of European influence at all. They're looking to just get the crumbs off the table. We know the types of petty bourgeoisie influence, I can see.
Yeah, and thinking about, I'm not trying to attribute anything positive to either of these people. And at the same time, I also want to think dialectically in the sense that the U.S. government, sometimes, I know that one of the things that is done is that sometimes leaders do come in when they have, like, a good intention, right? And they might want to, change their society or make that more independent or whatever. But the U.S. uses soft power, which is U.S. aid. But then when soft power doesn't work, they use hard power. They, like what we're seeing in Haiti right now, they go in with weapons and they dispose of leaders. And, Maduro, Venezuelan Maduro, President Maduro, he talked about how they spent $98 million in US aid to overthrow him in this past election, and it didn't work. And they, have talked about invading Venezuela. Like, Trump has mentioned invading Venezuela
several times.
Several times. And, and think about, I don't know if people remember Bolivia's former president, Evo Morales, and he expelled US aid from Bolivia because he saw that it manipulates leaders. Like, he actually threw them out. And then the Colombian president, the new president, he talked about how US aid funded entire sections of the country's like security forces. And these forces have committed insane massacres over the years. I went to one village. I went to see the Guardia Cimarrona, which is the Maroon Guard, and they're like way up there in like very rural. And they were telling me they have a barracks around their entire village, and every single person in the village over a certain age, I think over age 16, is part of the Maroon Guard. And it's all Black and Indigenous people. They're all patrolling, making sure that they're safe. And, they're protecting themselves from narco traffickers, but they're also protecting themselves from security forces. There's a river that runs right in front of their village. And we went out there one day, and they said that just a couple years ago, that river was so full of bodies that you couldn't see the water. It was just stacks and stacks and stacks of bodies, thousands of people murdered. And so this is what the USAID is paying for, in Latin America. And so even when we say USAID as soft power, it kind of is soft power, but it's also kind of not soft power because it's directly funding these hard power, like security, military initiatives. And there's one more place I was reading about that they spent $41.7 million on Georgian elections, not Georgia, US Georgia, Europe. I don't know if folks had been paying attention, but there were all these, pro-democracy riots and this sort happening in Georgia this year because Georgia's right next to Russia, right? It would actually make zero sense for them to have an adversarial relationship to their neighbor. Like, think about like us having an adversarial relationship to Canada, right? It's stupid. It makes no sense. Yeah. I mean, it's happening, I know, but this makes no sense. If you're living next to a superpower, you would think, it makes sense to have some kind of trade relationship, some kind of relationship, right? It doesn't have to, it's not going to always be a positive relationship. But the U.S. wants to stop Georgia the country from having any relationship with Russia, even though Russia is one of the biggest economies in the world and one of the biggest energy producers in the world. So the Georgian people are freezing. They're not getting access to any of these things because previously their government was puppets, U.S. puppets. The new government is has a little bit of common sense and is like, oh, actually, Russia's not great, but unfortunately we kind of need them. So yeah, let's make this agreement so we can get some energy flowing into our country, so we can get some resources flowing into our country that the people can actually benefit from. And so, they pumped $41.7 million into, people to claim that the election was rigged. And, it's their same playbook that they do here, they do everywhere,
Yeah. I think we have to do a breakdown on the Asian influence that is happening in Africa, because it needs to be its own its own breakdown session, because that's so deep. Because we have to look at, I think yesterday said that it's not only the U.S. Like, we live in the U.S., so again, it's easy for us to critique the U.S. But look at Canada and Haiti. Look at Germany and where's Germany? Germany they are in somewhere. Is it really deep on a continent?
Germany, they own 40% of all the land in Namibia. 40%.
Yeah, Namibia.
In Namibia, and of course, there's France has been trying to dominate the Sahel for God knows how long. But the entire, when I'm referring to U.S. empire, I'm referring to U.S. empire as an aspect of the imperial core. There is a neoliberal, not to use a controversial word, but a cabal. They are an actual cabal. There's a neoliberal cabal who is transnational, who, they like literally their ancestors are in England, are in Australia, are in the US, are in France, or whatever. They're all sort of like intermixed. But that, like the US empire is only one tentacle of the imperial core. And the imperial core being like the traditional colonial powers. And I think it's an interesting topic to talk about the second world, which I think a lot of people forget. Everyone knows about the third world, but the term out because the second world was the socialist world, was China and Russia. So the second world, I always say this, that they're out for themselves. They're out to uplift their own people. Especially Russia. But also, when I think about like China, for example, I mean, China has been in trade relationships for thousands of years, like long before capitalism was ever a thing.
Yes.
It has always done trade relationships. And in the Soviet system and the socialist system, there's this idea of like win-win economics, like win-win market, because like a market itself, a market-based economy is not a capitalist invention. There were markets in ancient Africa thousands of years ago. Like a market is not a new thing. Markets have always existed. And when we talk about like the market in the current world, in the current neoliberal world we live in, we're really talking about like the imperial cores, like capitalist market that functions in a very specific way as a result of like European domination, which I'm not saying that everything that Russia and China does is good for the continent. I'm not saying that like these are I'm not even saying they're net positives or anything like that. But I do think that as people that are part of the imperial core of the US, we have an obligation to focus on our government. And yeah, keep an eye on Russia, especially Russia, but keep an eye on China as well. Because again, we know that they're looking out for their own people. They're not going to be we have to look out for our own people as
Correct.
well. So,
I
we have to look at them. And also it's incomparable. Like how many military bases does China have in other countries outside of China? How many? 0. How many military bases does the US alone, not talking about the rest of the world? US 800 military bases outside of the US. How many military bases does Russia have outside the US? I mean probably a couple in Ukraine, maybe some in the former Soviet nations, maybe a dozen or something like that. So like the scale is so different that for me it makes more sense to focus on the one that is like doing the vast majority of the evil around the world. And also, we keep an eye on China, keep an eye on Russia. We know that they're not out for our best interest. We have to be realistic about that. But like who is like out here militarily like assassinating leaders and like overthrowing governments, paying terrorist groups to destroy villages and like rape and kill women? Like there's only one like set of governments that's doing that. That's the imperial court. Like China's not doing that,
No, China is just like, let's slack. I mean, when you say that they take care of themselves, it's more like they go out, invest in the infrastructure, invest in these countries, and then like get their people, I think it's countries in Africa where Chinese are considered Black or African or indigenous. And
but even on the China question though, it depends on like what's happening in the world, right? Because some of these countries are thrown into this battle for world dominance by virtue of them internally strengthening themselves and what Jay identified as like market sort of trade with other countries. And I think of a country like the United States is always in. Am I being heard? My screen is a little frozen,
your screen, but your audio's fine.
Okay, so we see that the Chinese people are, in many cases, experiencing their own government. They're experiencing all these things, and they have a Chinese government that's protecting them. But even as Chinese people go out into the world and try to define, their lives in different places, that's also a part of that. But the United States government, which is the core of imperialism, right? The world dominance and imperialism, has a way of drawing out these sort of relationships as a threat to U.S. dominance of the world. The only dominance that's correct in the world landscape as we see it is United States dominance. Anything that's a threat to that is seen as an enemy. And you can see that because United States government has control over the UN, they have control over NATO, they have control all of these other sort of bodies that represent its interests in different various forms, and they try to hide behind that. But the United States government continues to really evoke its influence in these different kinds of ways, and draw out these relationships that they want us to believe are antagonistic. Russia just trying to live. I'm not a Russian advocate, right? But I think that a country that doesn't have military bases in all around the world isn't a threat to me or anybody else, right? But Russian people trying to live, and they also have to protect themselves from what they see also as a growing threat. And if the U.S. government has trying to create enemies at your border, you should probably pay attention to that. And they've never been good to you. If they're trying to draw you out in the middle of your sea while you're doing your exercises, you know what I mean? You should probably pay attention to that. So then when you respond, it's like gaslighting. So when you respond, you're now the crazy reactionary person as opposed to somebody who's just like, this makes 1 and 1 makes 2. So somebody come to your door with a gun, talk about, I'm just trying to see if you okay. And they've never been nice to you, and you just like, I'm good, back up, and they still at your door, they actually putting camps on your front lawn, then maybe you should be like, this ain't good. And I think, we have to be able to identify that and recognize, that, the way that the U.S. Is playing itself in the world is an antagonistic point. And you're going to do that when you've caused so much damage and violence throughout the world. You should expect retaliation.
I'm thinking about how, I mentioned that I have reservations about how China moves on the continent. And also the reason why they're able to move to some extent in the ways they're able to move is because the US set the standard so low. All they got to do is not try and overthrow a country, and they're already better than the US. So the US sets the negotiations at the lowest they could possibly be. We'll actually give you money. We won't overthrow your government. We'll give you 2 cents. 2 cents is better than overthrowing your government and murdering your people, right? And so that is part of the conversation I feel like we should be having too, is that multipolarity by itself is a net positive to China. China itself might not be a net positive, but multipolarity is, in the sense that giving these other countries options that are just not the U.S. government, options that can actually protect militarily the things that they create, So China has built hospitals and roads and all over Africa, all over the continent. And, they can't just go in and just destroy everything that China's built, because China has the second biggest, even though it's half the size of the US government, they still have the second biggest army in the world. I was just watching on Twitter the SWAT games, where they had all of these international SWAT forces. First of all, the NYPD was so slow. I've never seen someone so slow in my life. The Chinese government, they had them it was literally less than half the time. They were done. They had completed the entire course. And it was just funny because they had a split screen. So the split screen is they were over. They were chopping it up with their family, with their friends. And then you see the NYPD still going through the whole thing, And so it's Russia and China have these military powers to protect what they build. And they're willing to protect what they build. And, that by itself creates some leverage. It's not a lot of leverage, but it's a little bit of leverage that can be utilized. And so, multipolar worlds, I think, is a good thing. But did you hear recently that they've been thinking about this? I don't know how, it's like my sources are Twitter and whatever. So who knows what these things are true. But the leader of India, Modi, they're thinking about giving him the whole, showing him the door from BRICS, like throwing him out of BRICS, because he's also, a big neocolonial puppet as well. He met with Trump just this past week, I think. But I've rambled on long enough. I'll pass it back to Coco.
All right. So before we continue discussion, I want to take a small commercial break and shout out AMWO merchandise. So one of the ways that you could support AMWO and the work we're doing is to buy some of our merch. So I have on the sweatshirt, the AMWO sweatshirt, and then Yejide has on a shirt that I have that shirt too in a different colorway. It's Black Woman, Black Power. So we want to encourage you to wear your politics on your sleeve, or on your body. So I have our fanny pack, which I love. This is a very tenacious, like, it's really good material. It's really handy. There's an inside pocket to it and an outside pocket. And I have the matching duffel bag. Yes. So when I travel, not only do I wear my politics on my sleeve, I wear my politics when I travel, going to the bank, going to the store. So I just want to encourage people to support AMWO. Sometimes we just don't want to, donate and get nothing from it. So that way you can go ahead and get merchandise. So to get more merchandise from AMWO, go to amwoahuru.org/merch. All right, and let's continue with our conversation.
Thanks for that break from
it's AMWO
programming.
AMWO.org/storefront.
So sorry.
Yeah, this is I really appreciate this discussion, and I just want to shout out Tag, who's been dominating the comments for a little bit. I'm not sure who Tag is, but but thank you so much for giving a lot of engagement. You'll see yourself on the screen a lot because we appreciate your questions, comments. We also just want to appreciate everybody else. We want to appreciate Tag also donated to this discussion as well. So thank you. If you want to be like Tag 5104, definitely donate. You can go on, you can click that QR code at the top right hand corner. You can go to amwoahuru.org/donate to donate. And again, we have the $250 goal for this programming. But I just want to get back into the topic. So I appreciate this, and I think I wanted to talk about the USAID too. So we are seeing, I wanted to dive deeper into that because it's sending Africa into a tizzy. People, Africa Summit was dominated. The Africa Summit just had a meeting was it last week, and they were dominated by the discussion of the USAID and what that looks like, and the money's coming out of important and vital healthcare. And then I spoke to an African who was just like, I ain't mad at it. It was just I ain't mad that the United States is not sending U.S. aid to these countries anymore. And because it has created a dependency, it has created rot on the African continent. And of course, some of these leaders who are in Africa, some people who are advocating for U.S. to continue to fund whatever it is that they're funding, because we just don't really. We've talked about the military aspect of it. We've seen some of these governments talking about how it was funding important medical contributions to help stave out, that's probably not the right word, but help to stamp out AIDS, other sort of outbreaks on the African continent, and that this is vital funding. But my question is this, my dude. If you have to depend for vital medical treatment of your people on an outside country in order to give you that money, and it's basically up to them whether they're going to continue to do so or not. And I think you might you might have to check. You might have to renegotiate at some point how you're able to take care of your people. And a lot of these petty bourgeois, neocolonial people have been in power. They didn't care. They didn't care because they assumed that the money would continue to flow in. So they never had to challenge this. They were never forced to think of some alternative method of doing this thing. But people and governments like the one that's happening in Mali and Burkina Faso, they're like, we don't want nobody to be able to control our economy. We don't want nobody to be able to control what kind of health care that we're giving our people. We want to be able to do this and not have to be at the ebb and flow of somebody else's economy. So they start thinking about self-determined, but the lackeys, the neo-colonial rulers of Africa who don't even care about the people, will maintain these relationships and maintain this billions of dollars, because not only does it come to whatever program they claimed it was going to, it goes to their pockets. This is how they get funded. This is how they're able to fund their lavish lifestyles, their $1,000 suits, their nice cars, their trips to Europe when they get sick. It's that relationship that they have to that money. So we're seeing the African summit was dominated by this. I mean, I pulled up a quote. I might not be able to do it now because my screen's a little frozen, but I pulled up a quote, and it was just people who are against USA was there's $22 million. Sorry, it's happening. So I'm going to forget my quote for right now. I'll pull it back up a little bit later, but I wanted to open it up. That thing, USAID, we've been talking about is funding military advancements on the continent of Africa, but we should also say that the African continent now is being, they in a chokehold trying to figure out what they need to do in order to, either appease Trump and try to get USA still flowing to fill their pockets, and or figure out what the alternative is going to be. And a lot of them are in this stuck. They don't know what the alternative is going to be because they assume that U.S. imperialism was their friend.
I was there was this Kissinger policy. I saw this video that talked about a Kissinger's policy towards Africa, which was population reduction and population control, right? And so a lot of these nonprofits are for that exact purpose, and sometimes they might talk about how they're doing HIV and AIDS work, which of course is very important, and I'm not trying to denigrate any of that work. And also, we know that there is not a lot of accountability around USAID. And for example, do you remember how the Ugandan in Uganda, there was a white woman, there was a very famous case, who had a clinic, and it was a fake clinic. He was not a doctor. And hundreds of Ugandan children died. And so we have US-based organizations operating in Africa with zero oversight, with zero accountability, and they say they're doing something, but do we know that they're actually doing those things? And again, I'm not denigrating. I understand that they have to fund some of the good things too, because otherwise USA doesn't work. If everything that's funded is a white woman killing hundreds of Ugandan babies, people would see through it much quicker. So there has to be a level of funding that is legitimate, that does actually help the people, a small scale of that. And then there's also the political, there's the funding of militias and security forces. There's the funding of the lifestyles of the neocolonial puppets. There's the funding of the people who are basically class traders and who are, struggling financially and just, want some money. The mercenary class, M23 rebels, for example. So there's all these different funding sources or ways that the money is being divided. One of those ways is semi-legitimate. But then again, we don't know how much is legitimate and how much isn't legitimate because of the lack of accountability, because of the lack of any kind of restrictions or we don't know exactly how bad some of these things are, but we do know that Kissinger had an explicit policy that has been enacted to this very day of population reduction and population control of the African population, because the continent is I forgot the exact statistics, but it's something like 60% of the population of the continent is under 20. So what does that tell us? That tells us the future is Africa. Because in Europe, in the
Mhm.
US, in Asia, even the
Dead.
population decline is nosediving.
Mhm.
And in Africa, in the continent, and as well as Latin America, it is skyrocketing. It is literally opposites, which
We have to see it.
because if there's way
We
more
have
of Africans and indigenous folks than there are of the white people, which there already are. Right now, there is way more of the both of those folks. But when that becomes even more obvious, then it'll become a lot harder for folks to just be under that like white thumb. When they notice it's just one white thumb, and then there's a whole host of Black and indigenous people that outnumber them. Once that recognition becomes even more clear, then it puts the U.S. and the entire imperial core at risk, and they can't have that happen.
I think
I think we should also see like the wars that are happening, the conflicts that are happening as a part of the population
mhm.
control as well. Because when you wipe out 500,000 people within the scope of 6 months, then which are mostly women and children, you're really also working toward controlling that population size, and you displacing them too, getting them out of Africa in their traditional lands. Are also taking over the lands that they traditionally applied to them, and so that they can make any claim on it. So we have to also look at that too. And I think like when we this question of like, I think people need to understand like the control that the United States and all these other imperialists have on the African continent is so multifaceted. I know that sometimes when we see things that are very direct, like U.S. military boots on the ground, then we can recognize and identify that. But when we see the things that are less direct and more ubiquitous, then people don't understand it. They see two African armies fighting one another, and then it becomes an African question, right? Like, it's why are these Africans killing so many of us? And like, well, you don't understand who's funding. Somebody, I think Chairman even said like, there's no gun factory. There's no African gun manufacturer. There's none, right? So if and these militias and these, they have uniforms, the boots. Somebody's funding this war, and it's not Africa and African people, right? There's no gun manufacturing that's sending out, was Kalashnikovs and MR 16. I don't even know the name, the MR-16 rifles and all these other kinds of deadly weapons on that continent of Africa. So we have to like they put two and two together. That's the hard power influence. But that soft stuff is what is Kamala going, the vice president visiting Africa, handshaking with African presidents. It's the establishment of a council of African Negroes who are going to support culture in the African diaspora that's funded by the U.S. government. It's USAID, it's IMF, World Bank. It's all of these other sorts of things that really create the stream of influence that the United States has. And really the biggest one is the money part, right? Being able to control the flow of money into desperate nations who fundamentally do have a propensity to support their own economy, but because of this relationship, are left to be dependent on U.S. dollars and the other dollars as well. So I think that's really important in this discussion.
When something that you just said reminded me, like all of the U.S. weapons, right? That are flooded into everywhere. And I was just thinking about how President Sheinbaum of Mexico, did you see what she talked about over the past couple of days? Because Trump was saying how he's going to designate the U.S. Or the cartels, the Mexican drug cartels, as terrorist organizations. Which there's literally a book. I wish I could remember the name of the book, but it's something called like there is no cartels without the U.S. government, or something like literally like that's the name of the book, and it's literally about that exact thing, about how the cartels are an invention of our U.S. government in order to destabilize Mexico, in order to have access to its resources. The same playbook that they do everywhere: Boko Haram, ISIL, Al Qaeda, the Mujahideen, which became the Taliban, and like all of these different groups. The same thing that they've been doing everywhere. But when Trump said that he was going to designate the Mexican cartels as terrorist organizations, President Sheinbaum was like, sure, you can do that. And I will sue all of the U.S. manufacturers because all of their weapons are U.S. manufactured weapons. And she's like, that's interesting because we don't really manufacture weapons in Mexico. So how do they get all these weapons? And every time we confiscate large caches of their weapons, they're all U.S. made weapons. So, maybe we should, having the gun manufacturers is also terrorist supporters or adjacent or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think that's real because, I as you were talking, I was just like, who makes guns? Like if whole entire nations don't have one gun manufacturing plant in their space, then like who is supporting and supplying this? I mean like Mexico. They said we don't have no manufacturing place. We don't, no, we don't have
no tango.
No tango. Africa be like, we ain't got no, but yet we still see the flow of these weapons and the continuation of the violence that happens in these places. And I think that's really important to identify too. And I think, one thing that, this is the African Women's Organization, and I feel like we have to say this. We have to recognize as African women that we might be a little soft sometimes, when we see the violence that are happening to our African women. But I also want to be hard because African women are not helpless creatures. When wars for national liberation pop off, African women be out there with the guns, ready to fight, throw down their whole entire life to protect themselves and their children. But what the narrative is when we are talking about war and conflict is that we have these helpless populations, but they're kept helpless because of, neocolonial puppets, U.S. imperialism, and these women are not armed except for the interests of one side over the other. So I think it's really important to say that, and also we kind of get we were having this conversation in Anwell's leadership at one point where we're talking about how the women are getting these important, vital support systems that some maybe USAID dollars go toward, like making sure that women are protected against rape. But rape still happens, right? Massive rape as a means of control over women still happens. Massive rapes are also applicable to children and men as well. And that the greatest purveyor of violence in, say, places where African women are the biggest victims of rape are the greatest purveyor of violence, even though the numbers are African men, is U.S. imperialism. Like this is the fundamental impetus for the rape epidemics that you can see anywhere on the African continent, because these are the conditions that are created. That may be a little controversial and people might need to double back and hear that a little bit more, but like if we're talking about militias going into a place in the Congo and raping and killing and wiping out, causing mayhem and murder and rape, and that really forces the displacement of people and populations because of this violence. You're going to get out of there. You ain't going to want to be raped, so you're going to move off of your home, your national territory. You're going to get out of there. That's a method to clear out populations and control, which is funded by U.S. imperialism and other actors as well. So we have to really think about how we approach that question. I was just looking at I think she's the CEO of Oxfam, which is a non-governmental organization that we've been familiar with and that's works in Africa. And I've been looking at some videos that they have, and they're trying to differentiate themselves from the general NGO population. I haven't dug deep enough into it, but they're like, yeah, they had this whole series on colonialism. They had this whole series on the exploitation of populations, and they came out saying that they didn't get any DEI dollars, and that their work is not based on that. So we even have these traditionally, these organizations that traditionally operate on the African continent to support this idea of charity, now trying to differentiate themselves from the current government of the United States. So I think that's really, really interesting in this moment.
I think we're going to see a lot more of that in this administration of, you know, organizations pulling away from imperialist power, because we talked about it a little bit before when we were talking about the change in demographics, or the acknowledge we live in a global society. So now we know that African people, we are a large majority of the people on earth. And I really believe that these imperialist powers they already know. They already know their time is up. So that's why we're seeing these exaggerated, policies come into play, these strategies come into play. Your number one dude from South Africa is pretty much, he's African, talking about Elon Musk.
Wow.
He's very much pushing this, this influence of like it goes into shaming Americans, and the focuses are on African people, and our African people in the United States. It's clear and evident that that's where the emphasis is, Black and brown. But he is, leading these campaigns and bringing up these strategies and topics about, continuously making us workers, and utilizing, he said some things, I cannot remember right now, but he said some things about exploiting Africa to pull, because and think about it, all these Teslas are full of bauxite.
Mm-hmm.
This ugly cyber truck full of bauxite.
Oh, good.
Tesla's full of bauxite. His hand is in the Congo struggle very heavily. And once we have to recognize that we have to be on the offensive right now.
So he could be funding the Kagame's government too.
Yes, he could definitely. I mean, he has enough money to do it.
He's definitely funding the board. I'm on Twitter, and I've been on Twitter for almost 20 years at this point. And so my algorithm is very dialed in. It's like I am very liberal with the block button. I'm liking and disliking things constantly. And so I can tell when they tweak the algorithm, because things start suddenly showing up on my page that have never showed up in my entire life. This week, all these boers, all these pro-white South African farmers started showing up on my feed out of nowhere. So he's actively providing media coverage to these people, and probably funding as well. But did you hear about Julius Malema, what he said to him, to Elon?
No.
Oh, so good. I got to read to y'all, because he said, so Elon Musk is like, immediate sanctions for Malema and declaration of him as an international criminal, because, he has a famous, he sings the famous Kill the Boer thing, and he's part of the communist economic freedom fighters group. And so he wrote, I really think you have entirely lost your left brain, a typical spoiled brat and direct beneficiary of apartheid whiteness. I know Black people look the same at you, typical racist. Look closer and you'll realize there are two different people. America is exposing us to its stupidity. I don't care about your sanctions. I'll never stop fighting for Black people to be equal to white people. And if that makes me an international criminal, I am proud to be one. And I was just like, yes, every time he opens his mouth, I'm just like, woo,
yes.
Kill the boer. My only critique is that I do not want to be equal to white people. I want to be better.
Right. I'm African. I'm better already.
Listen.
Right.
So you want to take us into announcements, and then we can
for sure. So we're on our way to the Q&A section. So please prepare your questions. Put them in the chat. Like, this is a really good discussion, and I feel like I know there got to be questions out of there. So remember to share your name and your location, and then your question. And before we go into the Q&A section, we're going to go over some announcements. Let me share. I almost forgot about the announcements. All right. So again, we're wrapping up today's program. I hope you're motivated by what we have spoken about today. to contribute to the Mecca for African women in the form of the Annual Liberation Center. Remember, we have a $250 goal towards phase 2 of the fundraising for the Annual Liberation Center. Now, if you are an African woman and you are inspired or motivated or want to know more about ANWO, join ANWO's Join ANWO, which is the African National Women's Organization. We are the only anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, revolutionary organization for Black women. We have members in Africa, Europe, Latin America, and all around the United States. ANWO is leading on everyday issues concerning African women. We're not just on the internet. We are on the ground in our communities, organizing for African liberation. Join the International Collective of African Women, building the revolutionary capacity of African women. To learn more about membership and to join, visit anwohuru.org/join. And we can't talk about ANWO, the Mecca, the ANWO Liberation Center enough. ANWO is an organization of the African poor and working class. So we need your support to establish the international Mecca for African women. I want to repeat that again, the international Mecca of African women. So we're calling on our members, followers, viewers, or anyone that unites with establishing a working class embassy, a hub for community empowerment, and a testament to the resilience of African people. Don't wait until the program ends. Pledge your support now. Consider becoming a sustaining donor with donation levels starting at just $5 a month. We welcome one-time donations of any amount. So every dollar helps us buy a nail, drywall, flooring, plumbing. So donate at any time. Pass this to your family and friends to go ahead and donate, because this is something that we all should believe in. We talked about self-determination. This Annual Liberation Center is a place that we'll have self-determination to be able to better our community and bring African women from all around the world to, be more politically involved, more revolutionary. We showed you our shirts, what we got on, but here's more merch from ANWO. So wear your politics with ANWO. ANWO shop features t-shirts, sweatshirts, travel bags, mugs, hoodies, and even socks. So visit anwohuru.org/storefronts. I had to change the slide, storefront. Also, become a decolonizer. And that's what we call our distributors and customers of Decolonize Hair and Body. Decolonize Hair and Body are natural personal care products that highlight ingredients and traditional care practices used by Indigenous people all around the world. In addition to featuring images and quotes of African revolutionaries, they are good. I don't use nothing else on my skin, on my son's skin, than Decolonize, specifically Decolonize Blackberry and Hair Body Balm. Oh, it's my favorite. It smells so good. So from our butters and conditioners to our oils, Decolonize has you covered from head to toe. Make your next purchase of skincare and personal care products from us at decolonize.com. If you enjoyed tonight's program and would like to help us produce more shows in 2025, volunteer with us. And was looking for interpreters, video editors, chat moderators for our future broadcasts and programs. Email us at info@anwohuru.org if you would like to share your skills. So, special event alert. The African National Women's Organization is holding our annual membership drive happening March 1st to March 29th. Join us virtually on March 1st at 2 p.m. Pacific time, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for a rally to find out how you can participate and grow a branch in your region. From our LA branch, this is from our, this is from our East Coast or North branch, I think that's right. ANWO women must and African women must lead, from resistance to liberation, moderated by annual President Yesterday or Amila. There will be a panel discussion on the critical issues impacting African women and resistance strategies for organizing for liberation and self-determination. This event will be held at Medgar Evers College in SUNY Brooklyn, New York on Saturday, March 1st, 2025. From 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So right before the membership rally, Yesterday is going to be dropping jewels and getting the conversation going over at Medgar Evers College. Additionally, our LA branch is providing a screening of a powerful documentary that covers the government attacks on the Black Panther Party and Black liberation movement, which led to the rise of Bloods and Crips. So they're having a special screening of bastards of the party, and then we'll have a discussion and refreshments afterwards. The Harris Daughters Book Club and Study Group are monthly virtual or in-person meetings led by the African National Women's Organization, where Black women in films come together to discuss books and other literature that centers on African liberation themes. We invite you to join whether you've read the book or not, or the piece or not, because it's always a good discussion. These are also open. The book club is also open to supporters and anyone that's in solidarity with AMWO. Our next discussion is going to be on March 9th, and we'll be discussing In Pursuit of Revolutionary Love by Joy James. Last but definitely not least, we are so excited and thrilled to invite you to the Liberation Lives Community Awards and Gala, a fundraising event hosted by AMWO to celebrate 10 years of AMWO organizing African women by joining us for an unforgettable evening of celebration, delicious food, inspiring talks, and live music. It's going to happen at Quabbah Hall in St. Louis, Missouri. Early bird tickets are available now, just $40 from now until February 20th, which is in a couple of days. And well, I wanted to say one more thing. Oh, yes. If you cannot attend, consider donating a ticket to someone in the area. Again, we are a organization of the African poor and working class, and we want to make sure that everyone has the ability to come to our events. And so that's it. Uhuru. That's a lot of events. We got a lot of local events going on, which is exciting. I always love a good local event. So hopefully we have some.
We trying to step it up this year. You know what I mean? We gotta, we've been to a lot of protests. We've been out there in these streets, but we really want to focus on our people who are watching us, people who support us, people who donate us, and have like in-person opportunities to like meet up with you and definitely break bread.
It's definitely a good time. So we want to go right now to have some local events and build within our respective regions and areas. I wish Parrish was on here. I know she's in the comments. Because we are seeing more, we're seeing more of assault on the poor and working class people right now underneath this governmental. I mean, we've always been persecuted. Like, let's not sugarcoat it. So it doesn't matter who is in power, it's just who is having the most influence right now. So we definitely have to. I'm sorry, Zayi. She's in the chat as Parrish, though. So Zayi Kamara Zayi Mandisa is the recruitment chair. Uhuru.
So we had
a lot of comments. The comments was jumping.
Mm-hmm.
We had a question from Charles Davis. Thank you so much for this question, Charles. How are we going to get rid of the neocolonial heads of state in Africa? Building revolutionary organizations. Join revolutionary organization. I mean, we could think that it's going to happen through osmosis, but a lot of what we've seen in terms of like movement on the continent of Africa, particularly toward a revolutionary perspective, is organization. You need to have people who are joining, who believe, who have a theory, who understand where they're trying to go. Because what we will see, like what we saw in Egypt, right, where the people were like, we got to get rid of this person, but like allowed somebody who wasn't even vetted by the community or by people or by to be, who was satisfied with that until they recognized later on that this person was also a stooge from the US government, right? So we have to build the capacity on the ground, and that's not an easy answer, but it's the necessary one. Like, that's what we have to do to get rid of the neocolonial heads of state. It won't happen by osmosis. It won't happen because something dropped out of the sky. It happens because we join ANWO, we join the party, we join other revolutionary organizations to like begin to like build the opposition to these things.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to talk about how the people who are living under these like neocolonial puppets experience a lot of repression from those people. And I mentioned earlier that the chairman of the Communist Party of Kenya was just arrested just yesterday. So go on. I'll throw it in the chat in Twitter and show them some support and help draw attention to some of their causes. That's something that's really important. I also wanted to talk about, I just put it in the chat, a link to their Twitter. Folks want to learn more about that party and the work that they're doing. They're actively experiencing repression right now from Ruto. And I also want to talk about so Rwanda dissidents also receive a lot of repression. On YouTube, someone might have noticed, or folks might have noticed that, we had someone who was kind of talking smack, Abdon Rurangwa, sorry for mispronouncing that name, but he's calling us poor little girls who are misguided and shallow-minded. And I went ahead and Googled his name, and he's actually a member of the Rwandan police. And the Rwandan police are known for repressing negative repressing basically dissidents and folks who speak up against the crimes of the Rwandan government. So we have a puppet in our chat. That's how we know we're making it big.
Right.
Even with USAID funded, we're still getting puppets in our chat, trying to like shake things up. But unfortunately for him, he can't do anything to us. We are not Rwandan citizens, and you can't torture our families back home, as Rwandan police are known to do. And if you don't believe me, there's a Washington Post, there's plenty of mainstream articles that talk all about the Rwandan police and what they do to Rwandan dissidents. So you can't do that to us, unfortunately for you. But you can talk shit in our chat, but it doesn't have the effect that you want it to, unfortunately.
We are women.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
But that's not the primary contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
Jay laid it out. But I just also want to say that Rwanda has the most amount of women in their parliament. So I think that we should also recognize this question of class and neocolonialism. It's not gender specific to men, but that people who are helping to run this government are African women as well, who are moving this truck along. So okay, one more thing before we have to close out for today. I just want to appreciate everybody, but there's one last double question. Tag, I think this was when we were talking about like narrative, what continent we were referring to. So I think we might have answered this already, but who controls the people in power controls the narrative, right? And we were talking about U.S. imperialism, and for the most part, the global narrative, what we are able to see in the U.S. I'm not sure where you are, Tag. What we're able to see in the U.S. is usually what the U.S. imperialist wants us to see. They dominate the news waves, and they dominate how we understand the world and geopolitics. So the people in power. What continent are we referring to? I'm hoping that we're referring to Africa. I
don't know. I assume, I always say the continent, and so I assume that that was probably in response to something I would say. When I say the continent, I mean Africa.
Yeah, and I don't know if other populations are I think they might feel impacted. I think, when we get to a place where we talk about like political education, the way that we talk about US imperialism might be different than how other people might talk about it who may not, have the language, right? But they definitely experience US imperialism, and how they talk about it might be different in the way that we talk about it. But I think that the other populations are aware of US imperialism. It sometimes is clouded by proxy wars and proxy conflicts, which may cloud US imperialist impact on it, but I definitely think that they are aware.
I mean, I would definitely say there are other populations definitely aware. I mean, AMWO is alliance member of EWA, International Women's Alliance, so we know that there's women in different demographics, nationalities, and ethnicities that are going struggling and fighting against U.S. imperialism as well.
Yeah. So I just want to thank everybody. This was a live episode. I'm really appreciative of everybody who tuned in, who lit up the comment section, who gave us a whole bunch of stuff to like really think about. And even you shouldn't be apologizing if you got this man's name wrong, but whatever. For the Rwandan agent that was in our chat calling us little girls when we out here really exposing the truth about what's happening. And I just want to thank everybody. Definitely tune in next month. We haven't picked the topic yet, but maybe it might be the breakdown of Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl performance that everybody has all these conspiracy theories around. But we'll figure it out, and we'll definitely post it. But definitely tune in. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in to us.